Live from the Millvale studios, it's Friday morning, and it's Gajtka game here on the River's Edge. Found at riversedgepgh.com. I'm your host, Matt Gajtka, and I am free from baseball for a few months now, and terrific to be back in the studio. Last week I had to record from the road as I wrapped up the 2016 season for the Pittsburgh Pirates for DKPittsburghSports.com. That's where you can find most of my work, although as the off-season will continue on, you won't see quite as much from me, at least not on the Pirates. But one thing I'm thrilled about as this month of October continues on is that the Pirates are finished and I get to be a fan for postseason baseball, which is one of my favorite parts of the sporting calendar. It goes down, I think, October does, as one of those great sports months to go along with April, which coincides with the hockey playoffs, basketball playoffs, start of the MLB regular season, the Masters tournament, if you're into golf, and possibly June. I always like that because that's when both hockey and basketball wrap up, and the baseball does get into full swing in the middle of the summer. But October could possibly be the best with the start of hockey season, the end of baseball season, and if you're big into football, like many people are in this country, then it's the second month, and we have a better idea of who's who, who's good, who's not, who's up, who's down, and all that good stuff that we like to talk about, not just in sports radio, but elsewhere around the sporting universe. Social media, of course, playing a huge role. Everyone's got their own talk show or platform if they want it these days. So October is rich for those types of topics, and so it's also a great month to have a talk show, and thanks to Brian and Tom for helping put on this program each and every week. Coming up later in this program for this October the 7th, 2016, I'll discuss the best way to continue a revolution when it comes to new ways of thinking in the world of sports, and particularly baseball. That'll be the majority of the first segment today. Also, a very guest-tastic edition of Gajtka Game, as my good friend on the Pirates beat, Adam Berry of MLB.com. He's out covering the Chicago Cubs and the San Francisco Giants in the National League Division Series in Chicago. He'll join me to discuss the baseball postseason and also what he and I both just witnessed close up, the Pirates' disappointing 2016 and their fall from playoff contention. So Adam and I will turn those topics over in our third segment. In our second segment tonight, happy to say that my brother Mark Gajtka will join us once again, a certified strength and conditioning specialist, athletic trainer, and most notably doctor of physical therapy. We're going to discuss some more medical topics from athletics and from sports, and hoping to make this a regular segment. Among this week's points of discussion, what procedure did Gregory Polanco of the Pirates recently undergo? And not that it's controversial, but it has not so much evidence that it is an effective type of a procedure. So we'll get into that, in addition to what an athlete should do to recover from a long season, which, of course, the baseball season is most definitely the most grueling in terms of day-to-day activity. So we'll get into that too. Also later in the episode, I'll ban another cliche. I took a request this week, in fact, from one of my good friends for this week's edition of that. And to close the program, the final number, as I always do. Again, you can fire possible topics my way during the week. I'm on Twitter at Matt Gajtka, MattGajtka, and also on Facebook at Matt Gajtka Sports Media. Both avenues are open. You can email me, matt at dkpittsburghsports.com. And again, reminding you that the River's Edge is a new kind of radio. We are on 24/7 streaming on our website, again, riversedgepgh.com. Local music, in addition to talk programming, and the palette of programs continues to expand, and you can find out more at our website. Well, speaking of expansion, I find that I've expanded my mind over the course of the past 10 years in examining sports and reconciling the proliferation of data and how that has changed the way we look at the sports that we love so much. There's not so much room for gray area. There's still plenty of it, believe me, but there's not quite as much of it because we know so much more about, for instance, in the sport of baseball. Well, how hard was that ball hit? We can tell you exactly how hard it was, down to the 10th of the mile per hour. We can tell you the launch angle of a home run, exactly how much that pitch just broke. That nasty curveball from Jameson Taillon, we can say exactly how nasty it is, compare it to the rest of the league. In the sport of hockey, we can tell you which players do the best at driving play toward the opponent's net, which turns out to be the most predictive measure of success in the sport, whether it be individually or team-wise. In football, we can say which running backs contribute more per play based on context and things like down and distance compared to their peers. We can tell you which teams do better on offense, defense, and special teams by the percentages, thanks to proprietary metrics from footballoutsiders.com and other innovative websites and endeavors out there. The list goes on and on. Basketball, Synergy Sports has changed the game there. We know who shoots best from 18 feet, from 22 feet, from the elbow, from inside the paint, from the corner, who defends best in those places, both individually and as teams. It's insane, the information that we have. Yet, I find some people don't want that. Some fans, and even some people who make their livings in this business, whether it be media or on the team side, coaches, managers, players, they don't want so much of that information. They want to keep a lot of that out of their heads. And from the players' side of things, I can understand that to a great degree. It is about performance, and whatever gets your head right and whatever helps you perform the best. Who am I to say that you're doing it the wrong way if it works for you? But in the more objective spheres of decision-making, team building, and managing teams, game theory, there's a lot less room for wiggling. And I think it's a question pertinent to these times, especially if we want to make a crossover to politics with another presidential election upon us just about a month away. The questions I have when attempting to explain new ways of thinking to people who are out there and trying to open their eyes and show them that they've been thinking about things in irrational ways, the questions that I think about and that run through my head are, number one, what gets through to people? What's the proper way to make an impression and to win hearts and minds? And number two, from the opposite side of that, what turns them off? What makes people turn away and not want to listen to you and clam up? And I'm not sure there's a universal answer. I don't think there's anything that's black and white in that area, ironically. In the world of black and white that is data in a lot of ways, there is no definite way to say, well, this will help people understand where you're coming from. This will make people more accepting of the information that's out there. And you may ask, why do I care? Well, sometimes I just don't know. But it does bother me when people don't use the rational sides of their brains. And I get that sports is an emotional thing for a lot of fans. And fans, I can forgive most fans for not wanting to dig too deeply into the numbers a lot of times. If you're not into fantasy sports, if you're not into sports gambling, then really you're not putting anything on the line outside of your emotions when you watch these games and these seasons progress and these teams change and handle situations differently. So I understand it. I said I forgive it. That may sound condescending. I think I would like to say I understand it more than anything else because, hey, who am I to tell you how to consume your entertainment options, which when it comes down to it, that's exactly what sports are. But I've always been an intellectually curious person and wanting to know more about things that I don't know about. And there's only one way to know what you don't know, and that's to ask questions, and that's to dig into things deeper. And when it comes to evangelizing for the merits of advanced analysis in sports, I think in many ways a combative approach can work. And fighting old ways of thinking can be dirty work. It can be difficult. It takes stamina. It takes strength. It takes a sharp mind. It takes a quick mind to win arguments, to maybe not even win them, but hold your own and show there's another perspective that is valid. You've heard the expression that well-behaved women never make history. Well, I think well-behaved stat heads never make history either. I think it's tough to make an impression if you're just saying, well, I totally understand where you're coming from, and this is just my thing. And it is my natural instinct to be empathetic, to try to reach out and say, all right, I get what you're saying, but here's my perspective. I'm not one to shout people down unless they come at me hard. And then, of course, I'll return fire in most cases because you feel like you have to defend yourself. So in that way, I think that it is best to say, you know what, this is right. This is the way that I think is right, and to put it out there. Because otherwise, if you're not aggressive with it to a certain extent, then conventional wisdom will rule. And nothing ever changes if people stay comfortable. That's the one thing that I keep coming back to. That's the one idea that I keep returning to when I think about, well, how should I approach this? How should I present new information? And I write a weekly feature on hiatus this week as I recalibrate after the baseball season. But I write a weekly feature almost every week for DKPittsburghSports.com called Matt Stats, in which I look into the publicly available information, and in some cases information that I've dug up myself, in order to prove or disprove narratives and myths and things that are out there, storylines that are out there that we may not really know are true or false. And so I get a great deal of enjoyment and satisfaction from finding out once and for all, or at least giving us a better idea of whether those are right or wrong. And in some ways, sometimes I'm aggressive toward those who are aggressively ignorant of the facts. But also, and I look at the other side here, too much can be too much, no matter the context. A light touch doesn't move the needle a lot of times, but when it's mixed in with some of the more aggressive proselytizing that you can do, some of the more aggressive evangelizing you can do, it can be just as effective as using the hammer. You can use the feather and you can use the hammer in different ways, and an artistic touch or a cleverness to your delivery, I find, can be also effective. And in a way, it lines up with the thought that variety is the spice of life. And there's a cliche that I often try to avoid, but I think it's very true in this case. And if you continue to just pound people over the head with it and be super hostile about their opinions and how they are not valid, people turn that off, I think, unless you're the most combative person in the world. And some people like that. Some people enjoy fighting about it. And hey, more power to you in that case. But I think most people shut down when they're being shouted down. And so that's why I in my perspective and in my approach to working different ways of thinking into the popular sports sphere, I think cleverness, I think humor, a lighter touch can also help with that and help get the point across. And there's a pretty good example in the so-called mainstream media. I'm not sure what that means these days with the increased fragmentation of the media, but I think MLB Network is a preeminent source for baseball news, even though it does belong to the Major League Baseball umbrella. It's under the Major League Baseball umbrella. And so perhaps we could say they don't report as harshly on certain things that an independent entity would, but when you're looking for information on the sport and for discussion on the sport, there are very few places that are better to go than MLB Network. And one of their hosts, one of their commentators is Brian Kenny, formerly of ESPN. And he's a good example of the technique of being aggressive when needed, but also bringing a rationality to it and not going over the top. And he's also an author of a recent book called Ahead of the Curve, Inside the Baseball Revolution. So that tells you exactly where he's coming from. He's all about new and exciting and digging into different ways of breaking down the same things that we've talked about in the sports talk industry for years and years. And he doesn't suffer fools. If he thinks something is stupid, he'll tell you. Like when Buck Showalter, the Orioles manager, never went to the best pitcher in his bullpen, even though he had 11 innings in which to do it in the AL wildcard game earlier this week against the Blue Jays. Zach Britton, he turned in perhaps the best season ever by a reliever. He's going to get Cy Young votes and Cy Young consideration, and deservedly so, with an ERA of .5. But he sat in the bullpen. He warmed up a couple of times but was never used because Buck Showalter wanted to save him for a save situation, coincidentally and ironically. But that save situation never came up because the Orioles were on the road, and when you give up the lead when you're on the road in the ninth inning or later, you lose the game. That's how it goes. And for a guy who's as intelligent, and I know Buck Showalter is intelligent and as well regarded for his bullpen management as he is, it's shocking that he fell victim to that old trope of holding on to your best reliever just in case you have the lead. Well, you lost the game waiting for that. And Brian Kenny and many others, myself included, were apoplectic about this. And again, why do we care so much? I don't know sometimes. I think we're just offended by people making wrong decisions, and not just wrong decisions, but blatantly wrong decisions, ones that can be demonstrated against in a variety of ways, and using rational data and well, all data is rational, but using it in a rational way is how I should put it, and in a valid way to build an argument that cannot be shot down in any kind of a well-mannered way. And people can say that, yeah, you don't manage according to a spreadsheet, you don't manage according to numbers, and there are human beings out there, and I understand all that, but as I said at the start of this segment, at the start of my argument, there are certain places where it's pretty black and white, and in baseball, maybe more than any other sport, you can really say, well, this was the highest leverage spot of the game, and you needed to find a way to get your best pitcher in there, and so guys like myself and Brian Kenny, who's much more accomplished than me in this field, certainly, but he shot it down, but he used facts. He used information to say why Buck Showalter messed up. And I've been told that being closed-minded toward the old school, which I can be at times, is just as bad as the old-timers being hostile to the new math and the people who are open toward the data revolution. I understand the gist of that statement, but I disagree in one case. If the old methods don't make any sense at all from a rational perspective, I think you owe it to yourself, be true to yourself, and be intellectually authentic, but also you owe it to your audience, if you're in the media, to discard those old ways, those invalidated ways of going about business, and whether it be sports, politics, whatever. I think we all have a responsibility to call something stupid if it is stupid, and that's the one bedrock that I will lean upon whenever getting into arguments over subjects on this topic, topics that come up that are relevant to what I was just talking about. The guesswork is gone in a lot of ways, and I think we need to admit that and not always say, okay, well, if you want to go about it the old way, that's fine. Well, no, it's not fine in some cases. In some cases, it's ignorance and it's negligence, and that's what I think we saw from Buck Showalter the other night in the AL wildcard game, and we'll continue to see it. Let's not kid ourselves, even as the information becomes more and more reliable and more public and available. Let's take a break on Gajtka's Got Game. When I come back, I'll welcome my brother Mark Gajtka, doctor of physical therapy. The doctor will be in, and we'll discuss about Gregory Polanco's recent procedure to alleviate pain in his shoulder and knee. Also, what an athlete should do after a long season. That and more all coming up with the expert. We'll talk to Mark in just a little bit here on the River's Edge.
Go, it's green, come on! Go!
God damn it, Brian, you need to calm down
Yeah,
with the road
I'm sick
rage.
of these people, these assholes.
The road rage, man. You gotta calm down on the road rage.
Well, I want to get to where we're going. We have a lot of great stuff coming up. We're going to Falling Water,
Bicycle Heaven.
the Mattress Factory,
Tuck Knob.
Trundle Manor. All right, which way do I go? Which way do I go? Come on,
right,
come on.
Right.
Too late now.
Right, come on.
Too late now, I gotta keep going. I'm not gonna sit here like some asshole.
Oh, come on, man.
All right, you're listening to The Culture Cruise. You can find us at riversedgepgh.com.
Your local Pittsburgh area museum podcast.
Yes, riversedgepgh.com, and come take a ride with us.
The River's Edge, this is Gajtka's Got Game. I'm your host, Matt Gajtka, for this Friday, October 7th, 2016. And as I mentioned in the opening segment of the show, the regular season for baseball is over, one of the more grueling endeavors in all of pro sports, but the postseason rolls on without the Pirates, though. And that is our pertinent topic here for the second period of Gajtka's Got Game. I want to discuss a little bit about what exactly an athlete can do to get over the rigors of 162 games. And with me to help flesh out that argument, flesh out that topic, is my brother, Mark Gajtka, joins me for the second time on this show. He's a doctor of physical therapy, certified strength and conditioning specialist, and also a registered certified athletic trainer, and studied at the University of Pittsburgh, but right now out in Crescent City, California, right at the top of the Golden State. And so, Mark, thanks for joining me on this edition of Gajk's Got Game.
Yeah, thanks for getting the time that we both could talk. I know the time difference sometimes is always a pain for both of us to have a conversation, so, man, this is cool.
Yeah, if I had my way, the whole country would be in the single time zone. We would just find a way to work that out. But
yeah, it'd be so easy.
Yeah, a long way to go before we get there. But so I spoke to you earlier in the week. I did a story on DKPittsburghSports.com about a procedure that Gregory Polanco underwent. He had platelet-rich plasma, his own platelet-rich plasma, injected into both his left shoulder and his left knee, two joints that have been bothering him, inflammation and pain over the course of the season. And it's the second time, in fact, in 2 years, he's had that knee injected with what they call PRP, again, platelet-rich plasma. Describe the procedure for those of us who are lay people in this realm, and how exactly it's done. Where does the plasma come from, and how is it, I guess, transformed before it's injected back into the patient?
Yeah, right. So this has been gaining a lot of popularity within probably the last 5 to 10 years, especially within the sporting realm. And, yeah, we had a pretty decent conversation about it because, I think a lot of people don't understand exactly what goes on with that. But, yeah, it is using the person's own blood. I don't think I've ever seen or heard of any other using different blood types or anything for that, because it just wouldn't make sense as far as how it's paired with the body, because our bodies do have very bad reactions to things that don't match with it. So obviously if you could use your own, they're going to. And so essentially what they do is they draw some blood out, and then from there they take it, they put it in a centrifuge, and they kind of spin it around. And what it ends up doing is it has the type of cells that it starts to pack and proliferate in there are 5 to 8 times stronger than what you have normally in the blood. And a lot of these things that they'll have are these healing properties and these healing cells. Without going into a ton of the physiology, it's things that if you were to trip and scrape your knee, it's the same type of healing that would occur in that case.
Okay.
Healing is healing, and the same cells are always going to go to that area. They're going to first get rid of the junk and clean it up, and then they're going to bring more cells there to do a number of different things between, trying to get rid or trying to actually cause some inflammation initially when the injury happens. And then from there, it'll help to remodel and create the new tissue that needs to be there. So that's the idea behind it, is they take it, they try to make and create as much of that as possible, put it back into the area where there's the injury or wherever they're showing, based off of a scan, usually is what they'll use, is to see, hey, we're seeing some tendonitis or tendinopathy type issues. And so they might use it in the areas where they're seeing that type of stuff. Or even cartilage damage is some other things where it's become more popular within the lay community. So things like osteoarthritis in the shoulder and the knee within people in their 50s, 60s, and so on. So that's another place that it's been used. But yeah, within the sporting community, you'll see this quite a bit. And to some extent, I'm actually seeing some decent research behind it, especially within certain areas of the body. It's been studied a little bit more. So
now, you and I were discussing earlier in the week that perhaps the research isn't quite there for a non-surgical, non-post-surgical use. That's typically when it is employed as after some sort of a surgery. It doesn't appear that Polanco underwent any surgery here. This was simply an injection. So are you convinced, or do you think there is a reason to believe that this could help in, as you mentioned, soft tissue injuries, tendons, cartilage, that type of thing?
Yeah, there's some decent studies that I had reviewed since you and I have talked about this as well, and they have been using it in non-surgical type opportunities. especially when you talk about the elbow and the shoulder. That's where I've seen two of the better ones. And in one particular study, they had used PRP within someone who had evidence of at least a partial tear of the UCL, or the common ligament that we see with Tommy John surgery and that whole spiel with loss of seasons and big-time surgeries and people not coming back for over a year type of idea. And they've used it there, and they've seen an 88% of those people that have had the injection plus a particular rehab protocol to follow, which is a really important aspect that I think I'll kind of touch on a little bit later, that they saw them return to play without having to have surgery. So it's a pretty important study, I think, when you're talking about seeing evidence of injury but not knowing, okay, what do we do now? Do we let that just calm down and give it the amount of stress from a rehab standpoint? Or do you do something else that can help actually make that tissue stronger so that it can do its job better? So it's kind of a cool thing. And then I've seen it also within shoulders and partial rotator cuff tears and things of that nature, like I mentioned before, with some of the osteoarthritic changes within a quote-unquote normal population and outside of an athletic population. And they've even seen some decent benefits there as well. So it's actually starting to gain some ground here, but I had seen it a lot more within post-surgical realms to help create more healing, and that was the initial studies I'd seen a lot of, but it's starting to gain ground within a more conservative approach, if you will.
Okay, so here's one thing that I thought about and that a commenter, in fact, on our site brought up too. What's the difference between this, putting your own blood in a centrifuge, or plasma, I should say, and injecting it into your body, and what's called blood doping in some of the endurance sports, where you build up the number of red blood cells in your own blood and then you re-inject it back into your bloodstream, and that's the type of thing that is, in fact, banned by the cycling governing body and other places too. In fact, it's pretty much across the board. You can't do it. So what do you think is the difference there? What is the difference being drawn there? Is it just you get such an advantage from the blood doping, increasing red blood cells, and thus the ability of your blood to carry oxygen? You get a much more of an advantage there than you would from any kind of PRP treatment?
Yeah, right. We're talking about two separate things. So the PRP, I guess I kind of glazed over a lot of, like I said, the physiology portion, but you're actually using the other components in the blood, like platelets, which is in the name. That's the type of stuff that you're actually concentrating and putting back in.
Okay.
So I don't, to the extent of red blood cells within PRP injections, yeah, it's a little bit out of my realm of exactly knowing a ton of the science behind it, but from my understanding with a lot of it, and I'll have to confirm again, Matt, with you probably in a week or so, or even tomorrow or something. We'll check it out. But a lot of that is actually the components of the blood that, again, are for creating a healthy environment for the tissue to heal. And so when you talk about blood doping, that's a different story, because they are packing in more red blood cells. And in that case, what they're trying to do is gain an advantage by delivering more oxygen to working muscles within the body. That's just how they continue to create the power they need to do their job. So that's why you see a lot within endurance sports, because it is a highly aerobic, meaning using a lot of oxygen or using oxygen type of task. So with blood doping, there's a lot more danger involved compared with the PRP type idea. PRP risks and side effects are very, very minimal compared to something like that, where you're actually putting in more red blood cells, which can overload the body and actually create a very dangerous atmosphere. I think even in some cases, we have seen if there's too many red blood cells, the spleen just gets overworked. Wow. And it can create an enlargement of that, which can become very, very dangerous.
Okay, so there you have it. I went off the board there. I apologize, but I was just thinking about it. That's something that, for like I said, people not in the medical industry, not learned in those areas, those two things, PRP and blood doping, seem almost not synonymous, but very similar. Okay, coming off of this,
I would say.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just for clarification's sake, I think one is for creating a competitive advantage, illegal and also very dangerous if not done correctly and managed properly. Definitely not recommended for the blood doping side, but the PRP is more for something on a rehabilitative side, trying to create like I said before, an optimal environment for you to add stress to the tissue for it to heal. So one rehabilitative, very low side effect, the other more for competitive edge type of idea. So
okay. And that digs into a whole different thing, which we could probably talk about for an hour, but we don't have an hour. We only have, about 10 or 15 minutes here. Again, my brother Mark Gajtka joins us, doctor of physical therapy. Many more letters after his name. He's in for what we hope, like I said, to make a recurring segment here. Whenever I have questions about something medical in the world of sports, and I do often, in fact, quite a bit. Here's a broader question, though, and getting back to the Polanco case, he grinded out the end of the season. I know he wasn't feeling great. I know many of the Pirates and the other teams that aren't in the postseason aren't feeling great right now, not just because they're not playing baseball in the postseason, but because baseball can beat you down, and if you play 140, 150 games, there's not much, obviously, time to recover. So this is the time to recover, and whether it be baseball or maybe a more physically grueling sport like hockey, basketball, football, what are these athletes going through right now? Can you give the listeners a general idea of the modern way to recover after an athletic season?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I mean, within sport, there's so many different phases, and within the strength and conditioning realm, because I think we can kind of maybe hit a little bit more on that, plus the physical therapy side, athletic training. It's all multidisciplinary of throughout a whole season when these people are going to be more of a players than others. So obviously towards the end of the season, if we're dealing and pushing somebody through, just trying to get them through injuries and trying to still play, based off of that type of idea, the PT rehabilitative side might be a little bit more active than the strength and conditioning side, but all of it's not necessarily synonymous, but autonomous within a certain degree. So these, you're going to have these players at all parts. It's just, it depends on the goal at that certain time and so on and so forth. So when you're talking about end of season, it's such a great time for all the healing and things to go down and decrease the stress. And then whenever you start to go from the end of season and then kind of transitioning into off season type of stuff, you really got to allow the body to kind of just heal down and let some of that stress off. Let a lot of the inflammation that you keep putting on it from a day-to-day basis kind of fade away. But you don't want to be completely restful. Sometimes that's a mistake to just allow people to do nothing. You have to be within an active environment still to some degree. And if you talk to all the teams within, and we're just talking about baseball here, you talk to each one of their medical staff, and each one might have a different answer as to how they might dose their players at the end of the season, or what they might allow their players to do at the end of the season. And, some of those you can look at successes of programs based off of, are people injury free, or were they allowed to get their star players or just normal players or whoever players through the season with as little time on the DL as possible. So judging success on a program, I think, is always very difficult because there are so many factors within the human body and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis that's pretty hard to control for. But some of the techniques, or I guess topics that I've at least seen within this, and discussion that I've seen within this, definitely allows for more of an active recovery initially, dealing with any injuries that they've had to neglect, just to kind of, not necessarily neglect completely, but at least get them through a season or towards the end of a season, especially with a push for the playoffs within mind. Sometimes those little nagging injuries and even maybe a little more than a nagging injury, you got to push through just because you're trying to help your team win. And that's the ultimate goal. And dealing with risk versus reward in certain cases, that's just something you have to do. So off season is extremely critical between nutrition, sleep habits, hydration levels, everything like that, keeping it very standard so that you can allow for a proper environment for healing. And then you kind of phase into correcting a lot of the issues that you've seen throughout that. With every activity comes kind of a certain cascade of maybe movement patterns that we see that become dysfunctional, especially when you talk about pitching, versus maybe a positional player. Maybe they'll take this time to look at Polanco, whatever was giving him trouble as far as a specific movement pattern, whether it be running and sprinting or cutting or swinging a bat that may have been faulty because of pain or caused because of weakness from the pain and things of that nature. So it's a good time to start cleaning up these dysfunctional movement patterns and strength deficits and things of that nature. So, it's a big question, but there are certain things that you need to allow for what we call proper periodization, meaning what type of stress you put on the body at certain times during the year for you to get the best outcome.
One last thing for you before I let you go, and clearly there's, each athlete is an individual. They have their own processes they have to go through in order to get themselves ready to go for the next season. But something that Sidney Crosby said recently made me think about what's the best way to go about the offseason and resting and then recovering and then training and building up strength again. And you just mentioned it with your reference to active rest and all that. But Crosby said he just took a couple of weeks away from hardcore training because the Penguins played all the way into mid-June, and then he had to get ready for the World Cup of Hockey, which started in early September. So he had about a month less than the typical Stanley Cup champion would have, and about 2 to 3 months less than what your typical NHL player would have in his offseason. But he said he thought it helped him stay sharper, and he didn't really lose that level of fitness that you sometimes do when you have that recovery period. So do you buy into that maybe a shorter offseason for a guy like Sidney Crosby, who, of course, is the elite of the elite, but do you think that could be a better situation for him to just keep it rolling as opposed to shutting it down for a longer stretch of time?
Yeah, I think you have to take that on a player-by-player basis. And I think towards the end, and Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think he was fairly healthy coming at the end of the year because some of these other times he's come out with, especially some of the playoff runs where he had the broken foot.
Right.
I believe was that the case.
He had a wrist problem too a couple of years ago.
Injuries, yeah. Yes, right. So he was playing through a lot of injuries then, and I think that's a case where you do take your due diligence and maybe look at how you're training and to what degree. But it kind of seemed like a perfect storm for him. He came off, and I mean, we're not within the complete know of how his body was and what he was dealing with towards the end of the season. So in that case, sometimes too, especially if he was training pretty hard and the amount that they're putting on their bodies from a game-by-game basis too within the NHL is just enormous. So the other thing you have to think about too that will kind of deplete your performance and deplete strength is actually overtraining. So that's another concern as well. And that doesn't necessarily mean physical too. Overtraining can also be within the mental preparation, especially I think someone that's focused and laser locked like Sidney Crosby can be. I'm sure his preparation before a game mentally is almost just as exhausting as the physical side of things. So both things can have a big time impact on a player's performance. I mean, you have to look at the whole picture. You can't just look at, because this is a sport, it's only physical, So to him, I think shutting down just mentally away from it for a moment, but still he was sitting within, like I said, a good physical ending to the year is from what I see from the outside looking in perspective. So maybe that was just, like I said, a perfect storm of things that hit where all he needed was maybe just a few moments to reflect on the season, enjoy a Stanley Cup win, and then move on to what his next task was at hand and getting Canada to win the World Cup of Hockey. So then you can see his performance obviously did not suffer with how he played within the World Cup. So pretty incredible stuff.
It was, and time will tell, I suppose. If he's in January and is feeling low energy, then maybe he needed a little bit more downtime. But as for right now, he is cruising along, looked great in the World Cup, which is a pretty high level of hockey, especially for September. And also it helps when you win. You brought it up. So when you're a Stanley Cup champion, I think that assists in some of that mental grind. So maybe the best of both worlds for Sidney Crosby this offseason. Fascinating topics, Mark. Thank you for your help, as always, educating us lay people here on the sports medicine side of things. We'll get back to you, I'm sure, later on this month, maybe before we move on and talk about, well, we've got, like I mentioned, the convergence of sports this month. So much going on, and when players are playing, injuries are happening. So it's always a pertinent topic of conversation. We'll talk to you later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much, Matt.
That's Mark. He's my brother. He's good at what he does. We'll let you decide for yourself how much you understood all that. Let me know how much you appreciate or would like more explanation on the medical side of things in social media venues. You can get back to me that way. Until then, we'll talk to you in a little bit. We'll come back for the third period, and Adam Berry of MLB.com will join me to discuss the MLB postseason after this break.
Would you be interested in developing conscious choice? Would you be interested in creating reactions rather than waiting for one to come? Would you be interested in combining serendipity and synchronicity? Would you be interested in making 1 + 1 = 3? Would you be interested in finding out about full impact mindfulness? If so, I challenge you to join myself, Jim Ellermeyer, a cognitive behavioral health therapist, every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. on the River's Edge, where we will challenge you to allow us to help you help yourself to fully participate in your life. Let the adventure begin.
Back again on the River's Edge. This is Matt Gajtka, and we've talked a lot of baseball, and we're going to continue to do that, even though Pirate season is over. But my favorite time of the baseball calendar is upon us. The postseason, I'll be able to watch it from home as a fan. The man that I have on the line right now, though, will not have that luxury, at least for the first round. He is out in Chicago, Wrigley Field, where he covered workout day prior to the start of the NLDS, National League Division Series, between the Chicago Cubs and the San Francisco Giants. His name is Adam Berry, and he covers the Pirates for MLB.com normally. Adam, they've got you moonlighting, don't they, out there in the Second City?
Yeah, I'm sort of a Giants backup beat reporter for a week or so. So it's a pretty cool assignment. I love getting out and seeing different things during the postseason. Like you said, it's a really exciting time of the year, especially this series.
Now, this is a bit of a throwback for you, correct? Because you covered the Giants when you were an intern for MLB.com.
I did, yeah, 2011. So, of course, it was an odd year. I covered the Giants.
So they didn't win,
story
right?
of my career.
So how was the I hate to be that stereotypical sports radio hack, but what was the mood like at Wrigley Field on Thursday? The Cubs, of course, not having to play in the wild card. They've had everything locked up for a couple of weeks. And then the Giants, well, they just survived another high-leverage game. Madison Bumgarner pitched unbelievable, as usual. They got a big hit from someone unlikely, as usual. And here they are back in the NLDS. So what's the media chatter and what's the player and manager chatter out there?
I think the Cubs are just really ready to play at this point. Like you said, they've been sort of sitting around with nothing to do for a long time. I think David Ross, the veteran catcher for the Cubs, compared it to a dog being locked up in a house all day while the owners are out. Then the owners come back and they just want to run around and play like crazy. So that's kind of where the Cubs are at. They just need to get out there. And you do wonder about some stuff like shaking off the rust and whether or not there'll be any of that going on, especially, with the Giants being so fresh and coming off that ultra competitive game the other night at Citi Field. And the Giants, I think Bruce Bochy agreed with a question, with the idea that they are basically playing with house money at this point. They don't really have anything to lose. They have the championships already. They've already won that crazy game to get here. So they're pretty loose. They didn't really do a whole lot on the field. They had a heck of a travel day just getting here, I think. They had a bad bus experience through New York and Chicago. So I think they didn't really need to practice a whole lot at this point. They're coming pretty fresh off a game. So it'll be interesting. The result will kind of wind up fitting, the narrative or feeding the narrative one way or the other, whether you want to be rested or whether you want to be coming in sharp. But we'll see how it goes. Should be a very good pitching matchup, as should basically all 5 games of this series if it goes the distance.
Yeah, that's the one thing that you look at is pitching, because the Giants, offensively, they don't scare you a whole heck of a lot. And I know that doesn't necessarily preclude them from doing well in the postseason, and they've pulled it off before with maybe lineups that you thought were so-so, but especially so this year. And again, the big names didn't perform great. Like Jeff Samardzija didn't have a great season, but Johnny Cueto came on late in the year. Madison Bumgarner did too. He's just consistent throughout the season for the most part. So do you give them a reasonable shot at pulling off the upset here? I know it's a best of 5 and anything can happen already, but are you seeing this as close to an even matchup, or are you more along the lines that the Cubs won 100-plus games for a reason and everyone should be picking them?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm being swayed by the whole even year thing or just from the craziness of that wild card game, but I'm probably giving the Giants a lot more of a shot than they deserve just based on the record. Because I don't, once you get into the postseason, it is, as everybody says, such a different game. It's not really about depth. It's about what your stars do. It's about your starting pitching and timely hitting. And, for one reason or another, the Giants have found a way to get that timely hitting, throughout their last couple of years in October. And we're also talking about a team that was, maybe the best or second best team in the National League in the first half. I think that's kind of gotten swept under the rug a little bit, just as poorly as they finished, that there's still a lot of talent on this team. The pitching, when everything's in order, is very good, especially the rotation, and that's really what matters a lot in such a short series. And Bruce Bochy is very good at managing a bullpen. Granted, the pieces he has probably aren't as strong as they have been in years past, but it's still a very competent team. I think the Cubs have clearly more talent and more depth. So if it does come down to, if Anthony Rizzo has the series that he's capable of, or if Chris Bryant does, then you can pretty well call this one over and done. They have a very strong rotation on their own. The bullpen is, Joe Madden used the phrase bullpen utopia to describe their 7, 8, and 9 guys. So they've got a lot going their way. But, yeah, it's not as inconceivable, as it might have been for the Mets for the Giants to win this series.
When you look to the other side of the National League bracket there, you have 2 teams in the Nationals and the Dodgers, who have their own merits, and of course they're coming in as respective division champions. But again, perhaps some weaknesses there, and in this case with injuries. Steven Strasburg, we don't know about his status or how good he's going to be after being shut down late in the season, and Clayton Kershaw just getting back up to speed. So that series is a tough one for me to predict. I think I like the Nationals' rotation depth a little bit better just because of the Max Scherzer factor. He could be the best pitcher in baseball at any time, but how do you see that series tilting?
Yeah, I'm in kind of the same boat as you. It's just not really having a good feel either way. I think the Dodgers would have an edge if everything breaks their way. I like, obviously, Kershaw, Hill, Maeda. That's not really a controversial opinion, but I like the three of them up top of the rotation. Corey Seager is a game changer. Adrian Gonzalez, the guy who's capable of changing the game with one swing. I like all of that. And if anything, you have to be concerned about the Nationals' depth coming in. Bryce Harper hasn't quite been himself down the stretch. Wilson Ramos, their starting catcher, has been hurt. I think he's done for the entire postseason. So, they've got some missing pieces. They do have Mark Melancon at the back end of the bullpen. Show your face for Pirates fans, certainly. It's pretty evenly matched, I think. I would not be surprised at all if that one went 5. But, just as unpredictable as this thing is, it could go 3. You could see Kershaw, Hill, Maeda just go out there, dominate, and not give the Nationals a chance. And at that point, if you have to pick between which rotation's upside do I like more, I probably would take the Dodgers. Okay.
And AL side, quickly, it almost seems like a complete toss-up on that side of the thing because the Rangers won a ton of games. They have the top seed, but they barely outscored opponents on the season. Then you have the Blue Jays, bullpen melting down late in the year. They still sneaked in. Then they got by the Orioles in the wild card game. They can still hit with anybody. Red Sox, you could argue they underperformed based on their run differential and other things like that. And the Indians missing 2 of their top starting pitchers. So, and that series just getting going on Thursday night. Does any team on that side stand out to you as a favorite?
Yeah, I think the Red Sox do, just in terms of pure talent in the lineup and in the rotation. There's just a lot of star caliber players in that Red Sox lineup. And then if David Price can finally have a good postseason, that would go a long way toward making that rotation a little bit more viable. Still a lot of questions in the bullpen, which makes them vulnerable. But I think in general, they have the highest upside, and they did put together a pretty complete season, whereas the Rangers finished with the best record, and I think their run differential basically played out in the worst possible way in Game 1 when the Blue Jays sort of, slugged them all over the ballpark and made all those one-run wins kind of come back and look a little silly.
All right, now the fun stuff. The season, 162 games. I think you and I probably covered the most out of anybody on the Pirates beat.
Sure.
I figured out I had 116 in the hopper. I don't know if you figured out exactly how many you have, but we saw a lot of baseball. I can put it.
Yeah.
I can put it that way. What'd you pick up from covering an entire season, being the number one person on the beat that maybe you hadn't anticipated? Anything that surprised you, stood out from the course of, I was going to say 6 months, but it was basically 7.5 if you count spring training too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was somewhere in the range of 120, 160, somewhere in the same range as where you finished out. And I think what stands out to me based on that is just that fatigue is a real thing. Not only for us,
it's real,
but, especially for players. It's really hard to get out there that often and compete at a high level and get yourself amped up for a day game after a night game. And, for these guys, it is essentially a job. It's a very, it's a fun job. It's a well-paid job. But, I mean, you got to show up and go to work each day. And being asked to do that for, 162 out of 183 straight days, it can be pretty exhausting. I think, you do sort of learn part of the human side of the game when you're around it as often as we have been, over the course of this year. You pick up on a lot of technical stuff, that I also appreciate. You learn about the game specifically from the people who are most qualified to talk about it. But just from a pure human perspective, I think just the grind of it really stands out to you when you're kind of a part of it.
I would take away a similar thing. And I also agree with you that I'm kind of a mechanical junkie. I play a lot of golf, so I equate the golf swing with the baseball swing. I've always been interested in the details. And then pitching is very similar in that way too, because you have control, you start the action. So that's when I get excited, is when they slip us those little tidbits of information. I was trying to do this or figure out something in this part of the delivery or the swing. So that's the stuff that I enjoy, in addition to the numerical analysis, which is always a huge part of the baseball thing too. You're not from Pittsburgh, Adam, so your thoughts on Pittsburgh and living in the city. I know you were on the road for half the time during the season, but now you're going to get another off season here in Western PA. How's it different from where you grew up in Florida?
Yeah, having grown up in Florida, you can basically just summarize it by saying it's colder, especially when you're there most of the off season. But no, I've really come to like and appreciate and in a way love the city of Pittsburgh. I think it's got so much to offer. I feel like I'm still exploring a whole new part of it. There's so much I haven't seen. Part of that's just the schedule. You don't have as many chances, as many nights to go out and see all that it does have to offer. But you get that. I think everybody probably says this. You get that sort of image of Pittsburgh painted for you, where it's old, steel town, industrial, and all that. And then you come here, and it's it's young, it's technology, it's medicine, it's a great restaurant and brewery scene. There's just a whole lot of good stuff going on in Pittsburgh that I've really come to appreciate. It's a part of the country that I probably wouldn't have seen if not for this job, and it's just something to appreciate even more.
Well, when you and your wife came to town, you lowered the median age, so thank you for that. You made it a more attractive place for magazines to write features and say Pittsburgh, the sexy city, and I don't even know if it's the Midwest, Northeast. Sorry, go ahead.
I said it's the new Brooklyn. It's the new
I've heard
just
that.
about the new everything that you can imagine.
Yeah, I saw even the Guardian of the UK was doing a story on it was something like the America's surprising cultural hub, Pittsburgh. So we'll take that one too.
Yeah, it's kind of a backhanded compliment in a way.
It is
hey,
surprising.
You would never believe. Yeah.
We will take it. For a while, Adam, growing up in this area, it was nothing but forehanded complaints, not backhanded compliments. So that's nothing we're going to certainly reject at this point. Well, you're a busy man. Thank you for a snippet of your time. Enjoy the division series, even though at Wrigley Field it gets a little crowded for the media, and I can only imagine that amps up quite a bit from the regular season.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit packed. But, no, I do appreciate you still being willing to talk to me after the amount of time that we spent together this year.
You only endeared yourself, my friends, over the course of 6 months. That's Adam Berry, MLB.com. Find his work at Pirates.com as well. We'll be back for the final segment of Gajtka's Got Game after this.
Hey, this is Mike Sasson. Have you been searching for something to do with your pathetic life? Guess what? This ain't it. But it'll kill about an hour. It's the Mike Sasson Show, starting 10 a.m. on July 19th. going to 11. It's going to be a lot of fun here on the River's Edge, a new kind of radio.
Final segment of Gajk's Got Game for October 7th, 2016. I'm Matt Gajtka. I appreciate the time from my brother Mark, doctor of physical therapy, as well as Adam Berry, not a doctor, but expert-level commentator on the Pittsburgh Pirates and Major League Baseball. I didn't really introduce him that well at the start of his segment, so I should say, in addition to having covered the Giants as an intern for MLB.com, he also was on the Rays beat as a backup for a couple of years down in Tampa, closer to his home, and came up to Pittsburgh last year as the number 2 man to Tom Singer, who unfortunately, after he retired as beat reporter for MLB.com, he was moving on to a different role, I should say, but he passed away last offseason. So we lost Tom, and I know that was a tough situation for Adam, who got to know him quite well, but Adam has done a wonderful job but succeeding Tom in that role. And Adam is an independent reporter. He is not an employee of the Pirates. So even though you see his work on Pirates.com, he is reporting. He's not getting anything spoon-fed to him or anything like that. So he's out there working with the rest of us in the independent media. I think that's a misconception that some people might have about not just Adam's work, but everyone else who writes on the team websites. They are employees of MajorLeagueBaseball.com and Advanced Media, not necessarily the teams. I know that may seem a little muddy at some points, but he is doing reporting. That is certainly not from the PR standpoint. That is Jim Turdinich and Dan Hart, who do great work in their own right in their roles. Let's go to the lightning round here. Ban the cliche. Again, this is on request from my good friend Alan Saunders and FOTS, friend of the show, Alan Saunders, who coincidentally just started a new website called Pittsburgh Hockey Digest, covering everything short of the Penguins, basically, related to Pittsburgh hockey. Find it at berghockey.com. Already several features up there, including one on Robert Morris University, my former employer, keeping local hockey talent close to home, particularly local high school hockey talent. Some good stuff there from Matt Popchak, one of the contributors on the website. We'll also see Andrew Wisniewski, Parker Hurley, and a Players Tribune style feature from Ashley Veshy, formerly of Robert Morris University, now playing in the Women's Professional Hockey League, which is in its second year. So that will be something to look forward to, something that Alan is very excited about, and we'll have Alan on the show again to talk about his new venture here, in addition to the several other entities that he writes for. He's got his own baby now, and it's Pittsburgh Hockey Digest, again, berghockey.com. But Alan covers Pitt basketball in addition to several other things, and he requested this cliche to be banned on this program, so I will do it. Score the basketball is what coaches have been saying for the past several years at least. I don't get that one. That is right in the sweet spot of ban the cliche, because not only is it unnecessary to say it that way, you can just say score. You can't score with anything else but the basketball in the sport of basketball. But it's also wordy when it doesn't need to be, and it becomes a little catchphrase, a verbal crutch. We all have them. Again, I empathize. But score the basketball is insulting to all of our intelligences. You can't throw a human through the basket and score points, so scoring the basketball is the only way to score points in basketball, if that makes any sense, and I think it does, now that I play it back in my head. So let's put that one in the pantheon of cliches that we are no longer going to use, and you have to promise, if you listen to this show, you're not going to use it. Score the basketball is this week's Ban the Cliche. And this week's final number is 20. Bet you can't guess why. 20 is the number of innings it took to end two teams' seasons this week in the wild card games. 11 for the Jays to knock out the Orioles at Rogers Center on Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Bumgarner and the Giants, as I touched upon earlier, knocked out the Mets 3-0 in the NL wildcard game at Citi Field in Queens. And it's the fifth year for this dramatic postseason device, and 20 is on the high end of the number of innings it's taken to knock out two postseason teams in past years. But to me, the wildcard, while exciting, while it draws in, ratings, which is all important, of course, and general interest at the start of the playoffs, gets things off to a rousing start. I'm not denigrating that one bit, but it still feels out of place to me for all of its merit. Baseball is a long season, the longest of seasons, 162 games, and over 6 months, almost a daily sport, and then you get knocked out in the course of one day. All that fighting and all that battling, and you could say, well, win the division, and you don't have to worry about it. And I would say, yes, you are correct. But if you're going to allow teams into the postseason and call it a playoff game, I don't think you can, again, logically, using the logical side of the brain to tie it back into the first part of this program, the first segment, I don't see how you go from a 1-game elimination scenario as part of the playoffs proper to then a 5-game and then a 7-game for the final 2 rounds. If anything, do it the other way. So you have a longer series early, and then you're guaranteeing you have the teams that have prevailed in those longer samples. Not guaranteeing, but you're giving yourself a better shot of having the best teams at the end. I would almost prefer to do a Super Bowl type thing at the end of the season. No World Series, just 1 game for the whole thing. But if you start off with a series of 7 gamers, then you narrow down the field, and you do, in a lot of ways, better determine who the better teams are. But as for right now, you're just saying, well, who has the better ace of the staff? And again, for the second time in 3 years, it was proven to be Madison Bumgarner, who single-handedly, I would say, knocked out the Mets, or almost. You can't single-handedly do anything in baseball, but he came about as close as you could on Wednesday night. It doesn't add up to me. I know it's fun. It's great. Instant Game 7, or Game 5, as it were. Instant double elimination game, to put it more pointedly. But it doesn't fit. It's incongruous with the rest of the baseball schedule, and I wish they would find a way to at least make it best out of 3 in the future. I think it's doable, and I think it's more fair and equitable. If you want to say you're inviting 10 teams to the playoffs, you're not really being truthful if 2 of them are done after playing just 1 ball game. Again, thanks to Adam and Mark for their input on the show, and Tom Benoit for showing up again to listen to this nonsense for another week. Thank you, most importantly, for listening and for watching on riversedgepgh.com. This is Matt Gajtka telling you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. Talk to you next week for another edition of Gajk's Got Game right here in the Millvale studios.